Hey guys, MonkeAU here with another video, and today we're going to be going through my MonkeAU 2024 MMA Awards. Now we're going to include, well, there's going to be multiple categories. There's going to be things like best fights, best submissions, blah 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 blah. But we're going to begin with my best prediction of the year. And obviously this was Bilal by decision against Leon. I predicted this in my 3 or 4 video. And I think I actually got it bang on in terms of everything. I said that Bilal was going to be more hungry. Leon barely does enough to win every single fight, and that he's not going to be able to repeat that comeback that he had against the second Kamaru Usman fight. And I predicted it perfectly. Bilal was way more hungry. For me, it was actually surprising. In the embedded series or at the face-offs, when Leon, went forward against Bilal and Bilal didn't even flinch, I knew for sure that he was going to win at that point. And I called it exactly. I'm pretty sure this was a 49-46 other than the final round. And yeah, this was a huge upset. No one else really saw this coming except people who picked him as a meme. But yeah, I got that right. My other really good picks this year was DDP by submission against Izzy. On paper, this wasn't that ambitious of a pick, I suppose, because, to me, it always made sense that Izzy really doesn't have that much of a ground game, and DDP's a bit of a bulldozer, so I thought it was just a matter of time. And that's pretty much how it played out, except what I didn't get right is DDP actually rocked Izzy and then took him down. I just thought he'd go off the bat, just take him down, which kind of goes to show that, DDP is far more well-rounded. But anyway, another prediction that no one really saw coming, but that I got, was Oliveira by decision against Chandler. Now, everyone was picking Oliveira, unless you picked Chandler by fluke KO, but by decision, that was pretty ambitious, and I wish I'd put money on this fight, because I'm pretty sure it was like 7-1, or I was paying $7 for this, and I didn't, but I wish I put money on it. I would have been a very rich man. But yeah, I just had a feeling that Chandler wouldn't be susceptible to the same tricks, and that his wrestling defense would be good enough to get rid of any submission offense that Oliveira can put through. And I got that pretty much right. To be fair, there was some hair-raising moments, like when Oliveira nearly knocked him out in round 1. I'm pretty sure the same way he did it in round 2 in the first fight, and then in round 5 when Chandler just gave Oliveira CTE. But other than that, that was a pretty good pick. Anyway, my worst prediction, it's got to be O'Malley by KO against Merab. Merab systematically shut down O'Malley in basically every single way. People are saying that this is a close fight on paper because, one guy made it 48-47. Give me a break, dude. Merab dominated this guy. He took him down more. He outstruck him. And yeah, I really just thought O'Malley would be able to knock out Merab, but I guess not. I think clearly all Merab had to do was just be more explosive, go side to side, which he really hadn't done in any fights prior to this one. I remember when I was watching a live, I thought, man, he's looking really quick because he's not as, plotty as he was against Cejudo. Other bad predictions I had this year was Figgy by decision against Jan. To be fair, in my defense, Jan just came back and looked so clinical that night. It was prime PD Jan. All of a sudden he was back. He wasn't making mistakes. I just thought Figgy was on a roll. I thought he was going to be able to outstrike Jan and take him down, do things like that, resist the takedowns, which, to be fair, he did early on. He did hit a couple takedowns and stuff some takedowns from Jan. That was very impressive. But Jan was just the better man every single round and 50-45'd him. Another really bad prediction I had this year was Ferguson by sub against Chiesa. On paper, to be fair, Chiesa is really vulnerable to the Das choke, which is Tony's go-to choke. But it pains me to say this, Tony just isn't the same anymore. I just hope they can give him someone like Nick Diaz, who also does not look that good anymore. Because I think, honestly, I'd probably pick Ferguson against Nick, because at least Ferguson is relatively all there. But still, I'll never pick against him because I'm delusional. Anyway, fight of the year. I'm going to go with Islam vs. Poirier, and I say this because the storyline in this fight was incredible. The whole thing about this is Dustin's final dance. Can he do it? And especially considering that this was the debut of the Golden Gloves, Dustin had his shorts, and it was pretty crazy. At first, I thought that Dustin would have gone out there or would have been subbed immediately, but when he resisted that, I can't remember what it's called, but when your arm gets twisted like this, the way that Aspinall did to Volkov, when he resisted that and spun out and then reversed position against Islam, I thought, wow, we're actually in for something incredible. Round 2 was pretty much a stand-up battle, and there was some back and forth, and then round 4, Dustin won that round. He cut Islam quite badly, The body shots was ridiculous. He had that iconic photo of Dustin with blood coming out of his nose. And Islam also, he outstruck Poirier. That's really impressive. No one saw that coming. And it was interesting because no one saw the fact that Dustin would be outstruck. No one saw that coming. But then again, no one saw the fact that Dustin would be able to so easily resist the takedowns of Islam. And I say easily, but like at a certain point, there wasn't, from my perspective, it didn't even look like there was much technique involved. He was literally just pushing him off and screaming, "Get the F off me." But still, this was a crazy fight. The crowd was on his feet. And yeah, it ended in a finish, round 5. But it showed that Poirier could hang with the best, man. It really was impressive. I mean, it would have been so terrible if Poirier just went out there and got subbed immediately. But this has to be fight of the year. It was just the build-up, the actual fight itself, back and forth war. Honorable mentions, DDP versus Adesanya. When I actually watched that live in Perth, and when I first watched it, I didn't really think that much of it, but then as I rewatched it more and more online, I actually realized, man, it was a crazy back and forth fight, because I think DDP won round 1, but then after that, he was getting outstruck by Izzy every single round. And this is rare from Izzy because, kind of, he's not like Leon in this sense, but he is a bit of a point fighter in that if he's not going to counter you and knock you out brutally, he's going to do just enough to win the round. But Adesanya was motivated. He kept going at him. And he was working the body, which was really impressive. And also, how can you forget the storyline that went into this fight? The King of Africa, who's a real African champ. And again, I was there in person, but when I saw Izzy cry at the press conference, I thought, whoa, this is getting personal. And it was a crazy fight. It was actually one of the biggest grudge matches of the year. And that was great. That was great that Perth got that fight. Yeah, it was just a back and forth, high stakes. And then DDP, I think he was actually losing. He was definitely losing against Adesanya. The fact that he had the power advantage, was able to knock down Izzy and then go for the sub, it was incredible. It was a good fight. Another honorable mention is definitely Pereira versus Khalil Rountree Jr. Kind of similar to the Islam versus Poirier fight in that, Rountree was such an underdog. No one saw it coming. And round 2, he drops Pereira. He made Pereira pay. Now, kind of just a different comment. I don't think this means that Pereira is a bad striker necessarily. I just think that Pereira gets countered by Muay Thai specifically, right? And Khalil's a Muay Thai fighter. Round 4 was legendary. I mean, Pereira just went... He did not miss a single shot. He was not hit by a single shot. He was slipping, he was weaving, he was working the body, he was throwing the knees. Some nasty knees, disgusting. And Khalil was basically knocked out on his feet, but he was still swinging. I mean, there's this moment where Pereira's piecing him up on the fence, but, he's still swinging, he's throwing a left, he's throwing a right, and then he clips Pereira. You think, oh man, maybe this could switch all of a sudden, But that was a crazy fight. That saved that pay-per-view. 307 was really bad up until that point. And then, yeah, another really crazy fight was Ribovic and Sahulaba. This was on UFC Noche. Round 3 was crazy. I can't remember who it was, but I think it was a Mexican guy. I want to say it's Ribovic, but don't quote me on that. But he was knocked out on his feet, basically, and he was just weaving, trying to survive. And then he came back, and that whole back and forth fight was crazy, right? And yeah, thank goodness that was at Noche. UFC Noche was so weird because every single fight until the main and co-main were crazy. They were so crazy, it was so wild. It really made Noche worth it. And I remember when this fight got announced, everyone was complaining about it, but look how it turned out. And then Ulabai versus Rebecki, that was a crazy fight. Crazy fight. I mean, Ulabai basically died at the end of round 3. No, in the middle of round 3. He got knocked out, and the ref, it's a miracle it didn't get stopped. But he slowly gets up like the Terminator, and then he comes back and it ends with him on top of Rebecki, laying ground and pound. That was a crazy fight, really showed that caveman mentality. But yeah, still, I just think that the storyline, the stakes involved, kind of how historic it was, because it showed that Poirier was good, but it also showed that Islam was good, and it was on the highest level of competition. That's why I've got to give Fight of the Year to Islam versus Poirier. Fight of the Year, originally this was Pereira, but clearly I forgot to replace the image. I'm going to have to go with Ilia to Poirier because, originally I was going to go Pereira, but the more I think about it, it's hard to deny the level of competition that these two fought, because Pereira, whilst he did brutally beat Jamal Hill, which by no means is not like a small achievement. Jamal Hill was pretty good, former champion, and also, beating Yuri and then Khalil Rountree, you just can't say that they're on the same level as beating Volkanovski and Holloway. Now, Volkanovski, I've still got a little bit of an asterisk next to it, because I do think the head kick from Islam played a big part in that fight. Even though most people don't think that, I still think that, because I mean, get real. If you're getting knocked out and then going down a weight class only 4 months after, how is that not going to affect your fight? But still, Topuria showed that it wasn't a fluke by knocking out Holloway in brutal fashion. And frankly, if it was anyone else but Holloway, they would have been knocked out in round 2, not round 3, because I watched some of the slow-mos of that, and man, Holloway was eating some filthy shots up until that final one. And also, it kind of went to show that Holloway, I think, looked really good in that fight. Like, really, really good. He was winning. I had him up on both rounds against Topuria until the third, obviously. But, and you know, same with Volk. I think Volk won the first round up until he got knocked out in the second. But it just goes to show that if Ilya is knocking out top 10 fighters of all time in the same year, it's got to make you fighter of the year, you know. And Pereira, don't get me wrong, incredible run. I mean, I think it's a really 50-50, but he saved 3 pay-per-views this year. I mean, that's ridiculous. And, you know, I remember there were talks of him saving 310, which, you know, he didn't end up doing. But still, the fact that the first thought in people's minds is when an event is cancelled is to consult Pereira, that kind of goes to show how special of a fighter he is. And, I mean, he is the face of the UFC, but I just think the level of competition Ilya fought was better and more noteworthy, you know. But don't get me wrong, Pereira is still a crazy, crazy man. And also DDP, because you have to acknowledge that, you know, he won the belt and then he subbed Adesanya, first man in history to do it. I don't know, it's just, people were initially hesitant with Adesanya getting a title shot, but it grew on people, and that fight turned out to be really good. And him versus Sean Strickland is actually, I watch that fight back all the time, because I'm constantly going back between who I think won that fight. I mean, I don't want to sound stupid, but I think I've probably watched that fight maybe 6 times, and unironically, my mind changes who won that fight every single time, and I'm not even kidding myself. So I guess it just goes to show that DDP really brought the action this year, and currently, DDP's resume is really incredible. You know, when you think about the fact that he beat Adesanya, he beat Strickland, he's probably going to beat him again. And if he can beat Kazmat, honestly, I think that makes DDP the greatest middleweight of all time, but that's a different conversation. Anyway, KO of the year, I really don't think there's much competition for this one. It has to be Holloway versus Gaethje. Frankly, I think this is the greatest KO of all time ever. And similar to the Poirier versus Islam fight, when it really comes into the criteria, like when you break down the criteria for determining KO of the year, you could give it to some random guy on the prelims, right? For being a flush flying knee. Like, I know there's a clip of the guy hit that flying knee midair and the guy went limp. But consider this was at UFC 300 when he was an underdog against Justin Gaethje, and he knocks him out at 4 minutes 59 seconds of round 5 for the BMF title. You couldn't make that up. It's silly, and he's winning the fight, and then he points, and then he gives Gaethje the chance, and who knows, Gaethje could have knocked him out. Who knows, man? It's possible. But it's just, that was just such a crazy moment. I remember I had all my friends over for that fight, and the whole room exploded. There was maybe 12 of us in there, and everyone was losing their minds, right? Because when they started swinging at the 10-second mark, everyone was like, yeah, typical, right? And everyone was like, yeah, this is sick. But then something changes when you see one of them randomly drop. You think, oh no, you know, like something huge has happened. And it's crazy. It's crazy. So no doubt this is KO of the year. I think I've already said this, the best KO ever. But still, other honorable mentions, we have to go to Topuria versus Volk. I didn't put Topuria versus Holloway because, to be fair, Holloway wasn't entirely knocked out. Like, he was still with it, but he was just, it was still a knockout, don't get me wrong, but he was still with it. Volk went limp. Like, Volk collapsed like a house of cards, man, and that was a brutal one to watch. And in the slow-mo, it's the same thing, you know, it goes to show that Topuria's technique was crazy. Another honorable mention, Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis. Again, a lot of these I'm considering the kind of the stakes behind this, and Poirier, you know, he was the underdog, a pretty sizable underdog, actually. And, you know, people were saying that this is it. It's the old guards out, the new guards in of lightweight. But Poirier did it, you know, it's a beautiful slip, hit him with a counter, he's down, and he hits him again. It was incredible. In the slow-mo, I mean, everyone remembers Poirier hitting him with a right, and blood comes out of his nose, of Benoit's nose, and then onto his arm. Brutal stuff. That was a crazy knockout, man. And then, of course, I have to mention Pereira versus Prochazka too. Prochazka's basically knocked out at the end of round 1, and then the leg kick came out of nowhere. After that knockout, people were talking about Pereira like he was a god. I mean, it was crazy. People were saying give him a title shot at heavyweight. People were saying he's top 5 of all time. This, that, and the other. Everyone thought he was unstoppable. Pereira's aura was through the roof at the end of this fight. And that was because it showed that not only could he strike, but that head kick was so quick. There was no read. There's nothing. It's incredible. And of course, I have to mention Sharabullet Magomedov versus Petrosan. Double spinning back fist. That's crazy. I remember I was watching that fight. Must have been at, 3 in the morning. And I yelled out loud, man, when I saw that. Because who saw that coming? I mean, the first spinning back fist, you think, all right, cool. But the second, and then he gets put out cold. Dude, crazy stuff. Submission of the year. I'm going to award this to Paddy Pimblett versus Bobby Green, King Green. And I say this because if you actually think about it, again, the stakes going into this fight was, is Paddy really top 15 worthy? Is he just going to get knocked out? Blah, blah, blah. I think he was a slight underdog in this fight, I think. But the fact that, maybe this is, no offense, this is probably playing into the fact that Bobby just had the dumbest game plan ever and shot for a takedown, which, you know, on paper, that's like the one thing you're not meant to do against Paddy. He got put in a triangle, but as you can see in the photo, he was also put in a simultaneous armbar, right? That's pretty impressive. That's very impressive, you know? And I think Paddy might have actually done some serious damage to Bobby's arm, but still, that was the submission of the year. Because if you think about the stakes, Paddy became top 15 ranked. It showed that he was legit, and frankly, he's lost basically all of his haters from the Jordan Levitt and Tony fights. Other honorable mentions, obviously DDP versus Adesanya, because DDP was the first to sub Adesanya, and then again, Islam versus Poirier. Islam showed grit. He did the Russian twist and then got him in a filthy, filthy DAS. But still, I'm going to give it a Paddy versus Green. Best performance of the year. Now, criteria for this basically comes down to how flawless was a fighter in their fight, right? And I'm going to give it to Umar versus Corey Sandhagen, because in this fight, not only did he outstrike Corey, but if my memory serves me correct, I don't think there was a single moment where Umar was in serious danger. And he went 5 rounds with Corey Sandhagen, the supposed boogeyman of you know, bantamweight, right? And he made him look easy, frankly. I mean, isn't it crazy? He outstruck Corey Sandhagen. And still, even though while Corey was, you know, getting out of some bad positions, he was still put in some really bad wrestling positions as well, right? And because of that, I just think that this was a flawless performance that has to be given best performance of the year. Other honorable mentions, obviously, I'm going to give it to Max Holloway and Justin Gaethje. Max Holloway basically schooled Gaethje for 4 rounds, and even though in round 4 there was it's a little sus, he did get dropped. There was a little moment. He came back and then asserted dominance, and then obviously knocked him out brutally in round 5. PDR versus Figgy, I mentioned this before, but PDR for 5 rounds outpointed Figgy, and he was not really in any significant danger except for round 4 when he got dropped, you know. So what's with round 4 and people getting dropped? Another good example, Pereira versus Hill. Hill couldn't even get us anything going, even though this ended pretty soon. Pereira made this look clinical. He just knocked him out. There was really nothing to it. This was building to his aura, you know. And then another fight that has to be mentioned is O'Malley versus Vera 2, because in that fight, O'Malley schooled Vera for 5 rounds up until the last 10 seconds when he was hit with a liver shot. Like, come on. And he hit him with an iconic right knee straight down the middle. And yeah, that was a really good performance, but again, I'm going to give it to Umar, because I don't think there was a single moment when he was in danger. When in these other ones, well, maybe Pereira versus Hill, but that was too short. And so if you go 5 rounds with the boogeyman of the division and you make it look easy, that's a good performance of the year. Worst performance of the year, I'm going to give it to O'Malley versus Dvalishvili. Another honorable mention obviously has to go to Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad. I think the problem is that O'Malley just couldn't get anything going at all. I think his most significant strike was at the end of round 1 when Dvalishvili kissed him on the neck and then walked away. So basically, O'Malley's best shot was a dog shot against Merab when he wasn't even looking. I mean, that really puts it in perspective. And I mean, just look at this photo alone. Merab outstruck O'Malley. He wrestled him. He abused him. There was really nothing to it. O'Malley, he had one job and he could just never get it going. And also, I don't know, he threw some teep kicks at the end of round 5 that seemed to do something. Like, that was actually pretty, damaging to Merab. But if my memory serves me correct, he then just didn't do anything, or he had one job of just sprawl, resist the takedown, and he didn't do it. Another honorable mention has to go to Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad. I mean, there are so many photos throughout the fight of Leon just sitting there like a deer in headlights and just not doing anything at all. Just looking off in the distance, looking kind of bored, and Bilal's just mauling him. It's like he had one job, and all of a sudden he woke up at the end of round 5 and then hit him with some elbows. But where was this attitude of round 1? Edwards does not have the killer instinct at all. He only just barely does enough. And frankly, I'm glad he's gone, honestly, because Bilal is a way better champion, even though, and that's like supposedly a hot take, but everyone agrees with me. Anyway, best up and coming fighter of the year. I'm going to give that to Diego Lopez, and I say that because he went from unranked to fighting Volk next, basically, because if you go from unranked to fighting for an interim title within 1 year, that speaks volumes. And yeah, it's incredible. I mean, his rise to stardom was really good. Obviously at 300, you can see the photo. He knocked out Sadiq in brutal fashion. And then, you know, when he gets to step up in competition at 303 against Ortega, he made featherweight, then he made lightweight, then he made catchweight, and then ultimately he fought against Ige. And whilst he was, you know, dominating Ige for the first 2 rounds, round 3 was a little suspicious, but you have to remember Lopez put himself through. I just think that considering he fought, and also then he fought Ortega and then knocked him out and then woke him up in the same round and had his way with him essentially for 3 rounds. You can't deny him. He is the best up and coming fighter of the year. Other honorable mentions has to be Carlos Prates. Has to be, because he's fought 4 times this year, all highlight KOs. I saw this guy in Perth, obviously, and yeah, now they wanted to give Carlos a fight against Shavkat at 310, but he couldn't because he was injured. But the fact that the UFC wants to give this guy a top 3 opponent already kind of goes to show that he is an up and coming fighter. Another good example, Ian Gary fought 4 times this year, he nearly beat Shavkat. He nearly got him. If Shavkat didn't have that Neanderthal head, he probably would have been subbed. But the fact that he has also reversed his image totally and saying that now he's like top 5 material for sure. He's fought all the boogeymen of the welterweight division. Same with Joaquin Buckley. You know, he's also come out as a kind of, not washed, but like a whatever middleweight fighter, and is now top 3 conversation worthy. It's really impressive. You know, you can't deny him. And also, I think next year is going to be really good for welterweight, because now that Kamaru, Leon, and Colby are gone, and now that we actually have fun, exciting fighters at welterweight, we're going to have a great year next year, especially considering that 3 of these up-and-coming fighters are in the same division, right? Anyway, best pay-per-view of the year, I don't really think there's much competition. It has to be UFC 300. I mean, the fact that this card began with Cody Garbrandt versus Figgy, that speaks volumes. You know, and also you can think about it. There's so many iconic moments. You had Moicano versus Turner. You had Yuri Prohaska versus Alexander Rakic. Oliveira versus Arman Sarukian. That was really close. Then obviously Gaethje Holloway, probably the biggest moment of the year. And then also Pereira Hill. You know, these are just that's an incredible list. All in one pay-per-view, top to bottom, it was stacked. There's really no competition. I think if you were to get a second place, it would probably have to go to UFC 299, in my opinion, because from top to bottom, that card was also stacked, because you had Pedion, Cejudo, Marab, O'Malley, Poirier, MVP was on that card. That's crazy. And I think RDA versus Gamrot in the prelims. That's also really impressive. UFC 305 as well. I think that was actually a pretty underrated card in my opinion, because you had Adesanya, DDP, you had Steve Ursa getting knocked out, which sucks. But then you also had a really good fight in Dan Hooker versus Gamrot. That was crazy. You had a bit of a stink fest in the Tuivasa fight, but what do you expect? But then you had Carlos Prates. You had some pretty interesting. You had some knockouts in the prelims. The list goes on. UFC 308, that was also pretty good, but I think the thing that kind of drags down 308 for me is like, I just don't like seeing fan favorites getting knocked out. You know, like obviously Holloway was knocked out, Whitaker was made to look easy, but then also the Dan Ige Lerone Murphy fight, that was a bit of a stink fest. Like Dan Ige just lost brain cells for some reason, couldn't fight. But then again, Shara Bullet, that was also in that fight. Ankalaev versus Rakic, that was actually really boring. But still, then you look at the prelims of 308, you had a fight of the year where the performance of Ulubai versus Rebecki. But still, these were very good pay-per-views for the year, no doubt. Best fight night of the year has to go to UFC Tampa, and I'm kind of pissed off because even though this happened last week, I didn't actually watch much of this for once, because I actually slept in thinking that this wasn't going to be that crazy of a fight night. But, you know, man, was I wrong. I mean, the amount of highlights and fight of the year worthy performance. I mean, the Cub Swanson fight was crazy, but I caught that live. But still, other honorable mentions have to go to UFC Abu Dhabi. That was with the Umar Corey Sandhagen fight, and in that one, you also had people like Figgy versus Vieira, Ferguson, Chiesa. Who else? I can't remember, but that was crazy. UFC Paris was also actually really good. Moicano Benoit Saint-Denis, that was a crazy fight, which I got right, by the way. I should have put that in my list. And then there was the one where I think Matt Frivola was told to spin around, and then he got instantly kicked into oblivion. That was crazy. And yeah, a lot of crazy fights. UFC Macau also under the radar. A lot of finishes. The main event was clinical. But yeah, UFC Tampa, I think the main event was really good. Co-main event was really good. And there was just a lot of random, brutal knockouts. Like, I can't remember who did it, but someone basically recreated the Kamaru Usman Jorge Masvidal knockout. That was filthy. Now, greatest upset of the year. I'm going to give this to Hooker vs. Gamrot, and I'm going to explain why. Because when you look at the other honorable mentions, I've got like Bilal vs. Leon. Here's the thing, it was at least a little feasible of the idea of Bilal beating Leon, right? It was possible. You know, it didn't feel like just a ridiculous bygone conclusion. And for me, I picked Bilal. I saw a logical path forward. And the same with Moicano versus Benoit Saint-Denis, because even though on paper Benoit was meant to whoop this guy, I thought it was possible that Moicano could sub him, which, I mean, you know, close, but ground and pound. But Dan Hooker vs. Gamrot, I seriously don't think a single person on earth picked Dan Hooker to beat Gamrot. And I didn't. I mean, literally, who saw that coming? And Hooker, he showed levels to his game. I mean, he resisted a lot of the takedowns, and he put Gamrot in some really bad positions. And those elbows were filthy. You know, even though he nearly got knocked out in round one, he made Gamrot pay. Gamrot nearly got knocked out at the end of round one as well. This was a back and forth war. This was one of my favorite fights of the year. I'm so glad I got to see it in person. And the fact that Dan Hooker's back in the top five, basically, that's great. You know, we're back to the 2020 days of UFC, you know, with Poirier, Gaethje, Hooker, people like that in the top five. It's great. And because of that, I have to reiterate, I don't think anyone saw this coming. I mean, seriously, Gamrot, the guy who beat Sarukian, was going to be beat by Hooker. And people say it's a robbery. It wasn't, really. Go back and watch the fight. Hooker won rounds 2 and 3 definitively. He arguably, you can't say round one, but he sure was competitive in round 1. Because of that, this has to be upset of the year. Underdog of the year, I'm going to give that to Brandon Royval, because he had to fight Moreno and Tyra, and I'm pretty sure he was both a pretty heavy underdog in both of those fights. But he kept going. He did not give up, and he, like he said, his job is to make the matchmaker's job hard, because, you know, it's going to be hard to justify Royval versus Pantoja 3, but he's making a case for it. You know, he keeps beating these contenders, and he was a pretty sizable underdog in both of them. Another example I want to give is Moicano, you know, because against Jalen Turner, he was a pretty big underdog, and he nearly got knocked out, to be fair. But then against Benoit Saint-Denis, also a pretty big underdog, and not many people were picking him, you know, but he pulled through, and because of that, he's in the honorable mentions. But still, I got to give it to Royval. He was fighting high levels of competition, and he was pretty competitive, and he keeps winning. Comeback of the year, I'm going to have to give this to JDM vs. Burns, because I think JDM, if my memory serves me right, he was maybe even 1-1, maybe 2-0 down against Burns, and he was sitting there. There was about 3 minutes on the clock, and, you know, he's a Perth boy, and I'm from Perth, and me and all my friends were like, shit, man, he's not going to win. But then as we were watching, he looks up at the clock, he says, fuck this, and then he spins off the cage and lands the most beautiful flush knee I've ever seen, and with that killer instinct, he keeps going and gets the TKO. I just think because of that showed grit, that showed heart, that showed that how much he wanted it, and because of that, that has to be the comeback of the year, because he would have been wrestled into a very easy decision for Burns, right? And this isn't necessarily the washed up Burns that we have today, even though he's not washed up, but you know what I mean? This was a competitive top 5 worthy Gilbert Burns, and JDM did it. You know, he showed grit, he showed heart, and because of that, that has to be the comeback of the year. Other honorable mentions got to be Ortega versus Rodriguez, because Ortega was basically knocked out on his feet multiple times in round 1. Round 2, he stunk it up, and then round 3, he actually got the sub. That was crazy. Also, Ortega, he rolled his ankle in not even before the fight began. So he's at a huge disadvantage, and he kept going. So that was a pretty crazy comeback. Another honorable mention has to be Moicano versus Turner. Even though this is it's not because of the heart of Moicano necessarily, it's more because of the stupidity of Turner. But he was a sitting duck at the end of round 1, and he came back and he got the win. So that's a pretty incredible comeback, but still, I'm going to have to give it to JDM vs. Burns. That just about does it for my MonkeAU MMA Awards of 2024. Leave a comment down below. What do you guys think of these awards? What other awards should be added? Do you guys agree? Do you guys disagree? And yeah, just leave me a comment. What do you think was your favorite moment of 2024? Leave a like, leave a subscription. I'll see you guys in the next video.